Judith Lewis Herman, Trauma and Recovery, The Aftermath of Violence, From Domestic Abuse to Political Terror. Trauma and Recovery highlights the ways in which political and social environments affect the study, understanding, and treatment of psychological trauma. Judith Lewis Herman explores the history of psychological trauma studies, from hysteria in the late 19th century to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, after World War II and Vietnam War, to the recognition of sexual and domestic violence. The book delves into the nature of trauma, the symptoms and consequences on an individual's psychology, and the impact of connections with others during the recovery process. It further discusses the strategies used by abusers and the unique challenges faced by survivors of repeated abuse.
The study of psychological trauma. The study of psychological trauma has been both supported and impeded by the political environment. Jean-Martin Charcot led the first serious studies of hysteria in the late 19th century but did not consider a patient's thoughts or feelings or search for a cure. Pierre Janet and Sigmund Freud followed and found that psychological trauma caused hysteria. Freud postulated that child abuse was the root cause. Soldiers' reactions to the horrors of war led to more attention being paid to the condition, and advances in the study of psychological trauma continued after World War II and the Vietnam War. The women's liberation movement of the 1970s led to a focus on studying rape, sexual, and domestic violence and their associated traumas. Effects of trauma on personality. Humans have natural responses to danger, which triggers feelings of fear and anger, with the ability to either confront or flee. However, traumatic events can render a person helpless, leading to intense and lasting changes in their psychology, cognition, and memory. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, arises when trauma damages a person's self-protection system. The symptoms can fall into three primary categories: hyperarousal, intrusion, and constriction. Traumatized individuals experience persistent expectations of danger, feel as though the traumatic event froze them in time, and may go into a state of altered consciousness, exhibiting numb emotions and a perceived indifference and passivity. Coping with psychological trauma. The impact of trauma on victims is profound and far-reaching, leading to a loss of faith, guilt, anger, and alienation. In Psychological Trauma, the author points out that trauma victims need positive connections to help restore their sense of self, while criticism and judgment can worsen their symptoms. Recovery is a long and challenging process that requires understanding, empathy, and acceptance from family, friends, and the community. Through studying psychological trauma, we confront the fragility of human nature and the capacity for both good and evil. Understanding the captive abuse syndrome. Repeated abuse instills fear, creates dependency, and destroys autonomy of victims, making them captives. Such trauma leads to an intensified form of post-traumatic stress disorder, known as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Captive abuse syndrome is a form of trauma that results from repeated abuse within a relationship, including captives in prisons, war camps, brothels, and domestic situations. Perpetrators follow a specific pattern of behavior, including instilling fear with threats, unpredictable behavior, or violence, and creating dependency by intermittently showing love or providing rewards. Victims are isolated and lose connections to the outside world, leading to a loss of autonomy. Ultimately, they may be forced to participate in atrocities that violate their moral codes. Even when they escape, the trauma may last a lifetime and can intensify symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, eventually leading to complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a progressive form of PTSD that is harder to overcome, and its symptoms can be intensified. Understanding the captive abuse syndrome is critical to recognize and treat patients who have suffered prolonged abuse. Practitioners can use this knowledge to help victims recover from the profound psychological impact of their experiences. Effects of child abuse. Children who suffer abuse are forced to adapt to unbearable situations and rely on their abusers for survival, hindering normal development. Survivors of abuse have coping mechanisms such as dissociative defenses, fragmented identities, and pathological regulation of emotions. Accepting the reality of abuse can make survivors feel crazy and lead to long-term PTSD symptoms, such as trust, independence, and relationship issues. While only a small percentage become abusers themselves, survivors are more vulnerable to victimization as adults. Revitalizing traumatized victims. Traumatized victims can regain their lost identities by reconnecting with others, leading to successful recovery. Recovery involves the establishment of safety, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection with ordinary life. Survivors must take charge of their recovery, and therapeutic interventions must be supportive, empathetic, and validating. The therapist must emphasize truth-telling, establish trust, define boundaries, and maintain neutrality. Empowerment and reconnection are the core experiences of recovery, compared to helplessness and isolation, the core experiences of psychological trauma. Healing from trauma. The aftermath of trauma diminishes a person's internal and external sense of safety. Therapy should address basic health needs such as sleeping, exercising, and eating well to establish a secure atmosphere. Physioneurosis of PTSD can be treated by medication, relaxation techniques, and recognition of symptoms. Daily logs help track progress and concrete safety plans should be developed. Psychotherapy aims to establish a trusting relationship with the patient, providing gradual support for the recovery process. Family, friends, and formal mental health and social welfare institutions can also provide support systems. Surviving and healing, the power of telling your trauma story. The journey to recovery after trauma involves survivors telling their stories to reconstruct a belief system that puts their undeserved suffering into context. Survivors begin by revealing their experiences in pieces without emotions and work with therapists to add information about their feelings. They search for the meaning of the event, asking the ultimate question of why to enable them to take actions that bring closure. Telling the story of the trauma brings up feelings of loss, remorse, disillusionment, and bereavement, but it is an essential stage for the survivor. Many patients avoid this stage and instead resort to fantasies of revenge, forgiveness, or compensation, but once they allow themselves to mourn and remember, the trauma begins to recede, and they can move on. Through therapy, the survivor reconstructs their life and belief system and faces life with few illusions but with gratitude. This book illustrates the power of telling your trauma story, which eventually becomes another memory among many, and the traumatic experience eventually loses its place as the central part of the survivor's life. Overcoming trauma and embracing empowerment. In Once a Warrior, Always a Warrior, survivors are encouraged to take control over their lives by shedding victim identities and seeking therapy. By embracing self-defense techniques, survivors can develop a sense of self-worth while protecting themselves from further harm. The book emphasizes the importance of concentration on the future and developing passions and desires, which paves the way for healthy and trusting relationships. Healing through connection. Trauma can leave individuals feeling isolated, but survivor groups can provide invaluable support. Different group therapies are suitable for different stages of recovery or types of trauma, such as combat, rape, incest, and domestic abuse. By sharing their experiences with others in similar situations, survivors can dispel feelings of isolation and guilt that often accompany trauma. Group therapy can provide a unique level of understanding and empathy that is invaluable in the healing process. As one Vietnam veteran explained, only another veteran could truly understand what he had experienced.
In Trauma and Recovery, Herman emphasizes the importance of supportive connections during the recovery process of trauma survivors, as well as the role of community and group therapy. The book outlines 3 stages of recovery from PTSD, establishing safety, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection with ordinary life. Ultimately, survivors must reconstruct their belief systems and regain control of their lives, shedding their victim identity and replacing it with an empowered persona. This summary provided a comprehensive overview of Herman's insights on psychological trauma, its complex origins, and the path to healing and rebuilding a sense of self.